It's-a me, Dire Gentleman, though you may also know me as the loud guy from that 2-hour video where I and a fellow professional writer responded to Lily Orchard's now infamous Twitter writing tips. The video performed well beyond what we could have ever imagined, and since its release a month ago, the channel has received a ton of comments asking us to share some of our own writing advice. And that's what this video is for. It's our own list of simple tips for you to consider when starting your next writing project.
And I'm the British one from the previous video, also known as Henry Galley. And yeah, I'm really glad to be here with Gus today with this fun little follow-up video explaining the 50 rules we suggest as alternatives to Lily's somewhat questionable writing tips.
You'll find that our 50 tips contain 100% less vague posting about children's cartoons and are actually designed to teach both new and experienced writers how to improve in the long run. Also, since these are our own tips, we'll be presenting each one in order without any additional commentary. This is to make it easier for the discussion to start in the comment section below. If you have a favorite tip or a least favorite tip, let us know by leaving a comment with the number below.
Alright, let's go. Tip number 1. Writing rules are made to be broken, but know which rules you're breaking and why.
Tip number 2. Plan ahead as much as you can when you start a story, but don't be afraid to break from your initial outline if you come up with a better idea.
Tip number 3. Understand why the greats are great. Not all popular things are that way for merit alone, but some might be.
Tip number 4. Make every line count. There is no space for wasted material.
Tip number 5. Your characters don't have to be likable. They do have to be interesting.
Tip number 6. Genre is for marketing. Don't let it stifle your creativity. A genre hybrid is potentially twice the audience.
Tip number 7. Writing what you know is great. Just try to know as much as you can.
Tip number 8. Know your premise. When you can explain it in 2 sentences or less, you've got it.
Tip number 9. Picture the specific kind of person who'd love what you're making, and write for them.
Tip number 10. When it comes to villains, they must pose a meaningful threat to the hero, or they are irrelevant.
Tip number 11. The first draft is you telling yourself the story. The second draft is you telling everyone else.
Tip number 12. Self-awareness about your own cliches or lazy tropes can be charming, but often isn't.
Tip number 13. Write the stories you'd want to read.
Tip number 14. Give your characters strong convictions. If they want something bad enough, the audience will want it for them.
Tip number 15. An underdeveloped idea on paper is worth infinitely more than a brilliant idea that stays in your head.
Tip number 16. Write as many drafts as it takes for you to feel confident in your story. Nobody needs to see it until you feel ready to show them.
Tip number 17. Exposition could be a chore, but it can't always be avoided. Entertain while you explain.
Tip number 18. You can't create a masterpiece in a vacuum. Surround yourself with talented peers who want to bring out the best in you.
Tip number 19. Do 2 of your characters fulfill essentially the same purpose in the narrative? Consider combining them into a single, more fleshed out character.
Tip number 20. The fear of other writers stealing your ideas is unfounded. You are the only one who can write your stories, and nobody can steal your voice.
Tip 21. Irony is comfortable, but it's cheap. Sincerity always feels more earned.
Tip number 22. Make sure each of the characters in your story are distinct from the others. Consider appearance, mannerisms, behavior, and especially dialogue.
Tip 23. There's no rule in writing that says you have to do it alone. Collaboration can lead to better writing.
Tip number 24. Give your story a compelling structure. Cool characters with nothing to do can't tell a good story on their own.
Tip 25. Your opening and ending need to be memorable for the right reasons, because the audience will never forget their first and last impressions.
Tip number 26. Be patient. The creative process is not a speed run.
Tip number 27. Do your research after you've written your first draft. A 6-hour Wikipedia safari does not count as writing.
Tip number 28. Make sure your protagonist has an interesting and defined personality, but leave room for them to grow.
Tip number 29. If part of your story seems boring to you, it's probably boring to everyone. Rewrite the fucker.
Tip number 30. Good dialogue is loaded with implicit meaning.
Tip number 31. If you're going to pay homage to another story, the best tribute you could give is improving on the original.
Tip number 32. Make even your minor characters interesting. A little detail will help them stand out. A one-scene wonder is still a wonder.
Tip number 33. If 2 characters in your story are enemies, give them opposing philosophies as well as opposing goals.
Tip number 34. Find a routine you can commit to and write as frequently as possible.
Tip 35. Long-form storytelling doesn't mean padded storytelling.
Tip number 36. First drafts are like a huge turd. Get it out of you first and then clean it up.
Tip 37. Take risks with your writing. Training wheels are for beginners.
Tip number 38. A mistake is a lesson waiting to happen. This applies to other writers' mistakes as well.
Tip number 39. Criticism and rejection can sting, but it comes with the territory.
Tip number 40. Once you finish a draft, put it down for a little while. Return to it when you no longer see your own intentions.
Tip number 41. Enjoy writing. If the idea of writing fills you with dread, and every second feels like immensely hard work, maybe reconsider your career choices.
Tip number 42. Write to music, particularly instrumentals and scores from movies, TV, and games. Music with lyrics may distract you.
Tip number 43. Show don't tell is not an absolute binary, and above all, try to do both with style.
Tip number 44. Speculative fiction is all about exploring new ideas, so come up with some original concepts of your own if you want to write in that genre.
Tip number 45. Perfectionism is procrastination in disguise.
Tip number 46. Want to know if your writing, particularly dialogue, reads naturally? Read it aloud.
Tip number 47. Be proactive. Don't wait for inspiration. Go hunt it down.
Tip number 48. Cultivate an eclectic taste in multiple mediums. Yes, this includes non-written forms of art such as animation and music. Cross-train your brain.
Tip 49. Just don't give up. A lot of people will. And a big part of success in the creative world is just outlasting the people who don't have the guts to stick it out.
Tip number 50. Never say in 101 rules what you can say in 50. Congratulations, you have absorbed the wisdom of these two fools and may now do whatever you wish with it.
Yeah, I really hope you enjoy those tips that Gus and I devised. Realize it's been a few weeks since the first video, but hey, unlike some people, we don't want to just, shart this shit out into the universe for quick clout. We want to give you actual good writing advice that hopefully you can find useful.
We'd also love to know if you have done any writing, professional or otherwise, that you are particularly proud of. If you're not a writer yourself, I hope you enjoyed this video and are able to share it with a writer you know. At the end of the day, we're just people who like words and happen to get paid to make them.
Yeah, I very much recommend if you either like the shit Gus and I have to say or really want something to hold over our heads if you hate us, you should definitely go and check out Less is More. It's our full cast horror comedy, audio drama podcast about a ghost and a ghoul becoming unlikely friends and all the weird, bizarre, supernatural shit that happens in the process.
You should also subscribe to the Dire Gentleman channel to watch more of us and our creative and hilarious friends as we confuse this website with our chaotic energy and surreal charm.
Goodbye, everyone. Thank you for watching.
And as always, we'll be seeing you in the future.